The Gilded Age was a period in the United States that started after the end of the Civil War. These changes in business, industrial technology, and urbanization occurred in New York City, San Francisco, and every city in between. The Gilded Age was a time of industrialization. It was called the Gilded Age because Mark Twain defined it as a set of social and economical problems covered by a golden lining. The Gilded Age was one of the most dynamic periods in American history. The industrial economy exploded, making many opportunities for the people who built the fortunes, but also those who left many farmers and workers struggling to survive. The national economy was amazingly increasing, but one that was accompanied by what many saw was an equally shocking difference between the rich and the poor. Andrew Carnegie and John D. Rockefeller transformed business and helped in the modern company economy, but also sometimes destroyed free market competition in the development. The rise of big business had a tremendous relationship with the Gilded Age. It was a time when more citizens began to become employees and when businesses started to rise up due to their amount of work. Women and children moved to factory line jobs from their domestic work at home to bring money to the table. Employees and laborers worked for many hours that made them clash over their working time, wages, sanitary workplaces, and safety conditions. Eventually, laborers started to organize themselves into unions to negotiate with companies. Later on, in 1886, workers also organized the American Federation of Labor to fight for laborers. Soon, labor unions rose to the practice of striking for better working conditions and compensation. These leadership strategies led to the legacy of strikes. Andrew Carnegie was born in Dunfermline, Scotland in 1836. As Carnegie's father was a weaver, Carnegie was expected to follow him. But because of the Industrial Revolution, he became a successful businessman. Carnegie wanted to take new opportunities, so he decided to work his way up in the Pennsylvania Railroad. Since the Civil War fueled the iron industry, Carnegie saw this as an opportunity to find potential in the iron industry. By the time the war was over, being this, Carnegie resigned from the Pennsylvania Railroad. This next step Carnegie made started the rest of Carnegie's career. Carnegie later became a great captain of industry and had his own series of steel plants, which controlled the steel industry in the U.S. Due to the fact that Carnegie believed in rights that laborers had to unionize and wanted to protect their jobs, Carnegie was different from other captains of industry. But this did not show in his actions and language. The plant that is well known is the plant in Homestead, Pennsylvania. As the factory opened, Carnegie gave his employees $2.73 for a 12-hour shift. Unskilled workers were getting paid 14 cents an hour. Workers at Carnegie's steel factory were demanded to work longer hours and were given lower wages. Carnegie condoned strike action and sympathized with strikers that turned violent. Henry Clay Frick was in charge when Carnegie went to Scotland, and Frick would cut their pay by 18 to 26%. Because of the poor working condition and low wages, many workers united together to barricade. This significant event was known as the 1892 Homestead Strike, a conflict between workers and management at Carnegie's factories. Carnegie's plan when the strike began was that he needed support from his plant manager, Henry Frick. Frick locked workers in the factory and hired Pinkertons, who were well-armed agents that controlled and maintained the strikers. Also, 8,000 state militia worked to stop the strike. Unfortunately, many people were killed during this process. The Homestead Strike hurt Carnegie's business and reputation terribly.
The raise of hours and decreases in pay allowed companies to produce more goods for less money. As factories began to employ unemployed workers, they took advantage of them by making them accomplish easy tasks and work for low wages. The Homestead Strike started when the people were not able to comply with Henry Clay Frick's attempt to cut salaries and produce more goods for less. Another factor was the conditions of the factory. These factors caused the people to form the Amalgamated Association of Iron and Steel Workers, the union that went up against and strived to overpower the dominant owners at the Carnegie Steel Company in 1892. This strike would soon receive national and local attention. Farmers would soon show support by giving food, materials, and everyday necessities to the strikers. These necessities allowed the strikers to survive and make the last strike.
The conditions of the factory were absolutely horrible. Conditions such as the path of cinder at the side of the factory, the shabby two-story houses, and sewage systems are terrible for the prices we're paying for them. Even though these conditions are brought upon us by alien workers, Carnegie is not paying us enough and charging us too much for what we need to live. At least wages, housing conditions, and opportunities for relaxation conform to the standards of living but the native whites had in mind. Let me do that again. The conditions of the factory were absolutely horrible. Conditions such as the path of cinder at the side of the factory, the shabby two-story houses, and the sewage systems are terrible for the prices we're paying for them. Even though these conditions are brought upon us by alien workers, Carnegie is not paying us enough and charging us too much for what we need to live. At least, wages, housing conditions, and opportunities for relaxation conform to the standards of living the native whites had in mind.
As the strike advanced, the possibility of labor-populist alliance circulated. Populist orators built ties with Farmers Alliance and the labor movement so farmers could send wheat and corn to striking workers at Carnegie's Homestead steel mill outside of Pittsburgh. Despite the support for such an alliance among many in the labor movement, American Federation of Labor leader Samuel Gompers opposed such political action.
During May 1882, I allied with the steel manufacturer Andrew Carnegie, as I served as the chairman of the Carnegie Steel Company. Producing a petition for iron and steel, I dedicated a majority of my time towards the H.C. Frick Coke Company and the Carnegie Brothers Steel Company. American society should have organized labor. During July 1892, the Homestead Strike occurred at Andrew Carnegie's U.S. Steel plant in Homestead, Pennsylvania.
Americans stand with horror as the murderous attempt of a Scotch baron, indefinite and guarded by Republican legislation, to continue a system of social cannibalism and force. With the aid of Pinkerton's soldiers, cutthroats, the American laborers must accept starvation wages in order to survive.
Pennsylvania's governor, afraid that this victory would encourage other strikers to strike, ordered state militia to Homestead. They were armed with the best rifles and Gatling guns, and they took over the plant. Many strikers were sent to jail. All the strike leaders were blacklisted from employment, and the rest returned to work.
Santa for what they believe in. What is amazing about this strike is that the people in Homestead were able to spread their cause all over the nation. This strike will forever be remembered in history as the inspiration for future protests, strikes, and movements.
The Homestead Strike will always have a special place in history because it was the first strike to get national attention. This strike showed all citizens of the United States the true side of business owners. It also showed the true side of their employees and workers. Although employees were blacklisted and some of them never worked again, they inspired future strikers. For example, the strikers of the Pullman strike were inspired by the series of events that occurred at Homestead. The one thing that these two strikes have in common was that they both started because of poor leadership strategies. These events happened because of a decision that big business leaders made. They had an opportunity to take advantage of laborers when the country was expanding into a new era. Many Americans were hoping this new beginning would be an opportunity for a better life, but this newfound wealth prevented that. The workers were mistreated by big business owners. This compulsion of wealth corrupted people and the nation. Strikers would always leave a legacy of exposing corruption and will inspire strikers in the future to help reform companies. These leadership strategies helped the American labor movement grow and would help companies industrialize in the future.